I'm Mackenzie Thompson, 29, sitting in the mahogany-lined office where Grandpa Harold's will is being read. My parents, Diane and Richard, fidget anxiously in their chairs. Mr. Bennett, Grandpa's attorney, hands me a check for $9 million. My mother's face contorts with rage. She snatches it from my trembling fingers, while my father flicks his lighter. "This is what you get for cutting us off," they snarl as the check curls into ash. I don't panic. I don't cry. I simply smile. Before I tell you why, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to follow my journey of standing up to toxic family members. Looking back, Grandpa Harold was my anchor in a storm. When I was 7, he taught me to fish at his lakeside cabin while my parents stayed home, claiming the outdoors wasn't their scene. That cabin became my sanctuary, a place where someone actually listened when I spoke. "Mac," he'd say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use, "the measure of wealth isn't what's in your bank account, but what's in your character." He'd say this while driving his 10-year-old Ford truck, despite having millions in assets. The irony wasn't lost on me, even as a child. He could afford luxury, but chose simplicity. My parents were his polar opposite. Diane and Richard Thompson lived in a sprawling house in Westfield they could barely afford, drove cars that stretched their credit, and dressed in designer clothes while arguing about overdue bills behind closed doors. Their solution was always the same: call Grandpa Harold. "Dad, we're in a bit of a bind this month," my mother would say in that honey-sweet voice she reserved exclusively for financial emergencies. "Just a small loan until Richard's commission comes through." Grandpa would sigh, write the check, and add it to a leather-bound notebook he kept in his desk drawer. I accidentally found that notebook when I was 15 while looking for a stapler. The amount my parents had borrowed over the years was staggering, over $300,000. Not a penny had been repaid. Meanwhile, I lived in a careful middle ground. My clothes came from department stores, not boutiques. I worked summer jobs starting at 16. When college application time came around, Grandpa Harold sat me down. "Mackenzie, I want to pay for your education," he said, his blue eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "But I have conditions." Those conditions were straightforward. Maintain a 3.5 GPA, work part-time to understand the value of money, and take financial literacy courses alongside my business major. I agreed immediately. For 4 years at Boston University, I honored our deal. I graduated with a finance degree, minimal student debt. I insisted on taking some loans to establish my credit, and job offers from 3 investment firms. My parents were baffled by my choices. "Why are you renting that tiny apartment?" my mother asked during her sole visit to my first place in Cambridge. "Your grandfather could buy you a condo." "Because I can afford this on my salary," I explained. The concept seemed foreign to them. After 3 years of working at Morgan Stanley, I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest 2-bedroom condo. Grandpa Harold was my only family member at my housewarming. My parents were on a cruise they couldn't afford. The real fracture happened when I turned 27. My parents' house was facing foreclosure again. This time, they tried a new approach. "Mackenzie, we know you've been saving," my father said over dinner at a restaurant he insisted on paying for. His card was declined. I covered it. "We need $50,000 to catch up on the mortgage. You can consider it a loan." I set down my fork. "Dad, I can't do that." "Can't or won't?" my mother snapped. "Both," I replied. "I don't have that kind of liquid cash, and even if I did, I've seen Grandpa's notebook. You don't repay loans." Their faces turned to stone. My father stood up, threw his napkin on the table. "So that's how it is. You've always been his favorite. Now you're just like him, holding money over families' heads." They left me sitting alone at that table. For 3 months, they didn't speak to me. When they finally called, it was because Grandpa Harold had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They needed me to talk sense into him about his treatment options. By which they meant choosing the most expensive ones regardless of his quality of life. When I visited Grandpa at his home, he was sitting in his favorite leather chair, thinner but still alert. "There's my girl," he said, opening his arms for a hug. We talked for hours that day. About his diagnosis, terminal, 6 months at best, about his wishes, minimal intervention, maximum comfort, and about his concerns. "Your parents will come around like vultures," he said, always direct. "I need your help protecting what I've built." Anything, I promised. What I didn't know then was how that promise would change everything. The first family dinner after Grandpa's diagnosis was a disaster. We gathered at his house, the colonial home where my father had grown up. My mother had insisted on catering, despite my offer to cook. "Your grandfather deserves the best in his condition," she said, though I noticed she'd ordered from the most expensive restaurant in town and used his credit card. Grandpa barely touched the elaborate spread. He sat at the head of the table, watching silently as my parents dominated the conversation. "We've been researching treatment centers," my mother announced. "There's an excellent facility in Switzerland. Very exclusive." Grandpa set down his water glass. "Diane, I've made my decisions about treatment." "But Harold, surely you want to fight this," my father interjected. "Money is no object." "It never is with you too, is it?" Grandpa replied quietly. The room went silent. I stared at my plate, feeling the tension thicken. "What's that supposed to mean?" my father demanded. Grandpa sighed. "It means I'm tired, Richard. Tired of watching you and Diane live beyond your means. Tired of bailing you out. Tired of the constant disappointment." My mother's face flushed crimson. "How dare you? After all we've done." "What exactly have you done, Diane?" Grandpa interrupted, his voice stronger than it had been all evening. "You've taken and taken. You've taught your daughter that material things matter more than integrity. You've squandered opportunities and resources that could have built something meaningful." I wanted to disappear through the floor. Not because I disagreed, everything he said was true, but because I knew what would come next. Sure enough, my mother turned her fury on me. "This is your doing," she hissed. "You've poisoned him against us." "She's done nothing of the sort," Grandpa countered. "In fact, Mackenzie has defended you more than you deserve." That night changed everything. My parents stopped pretending to care about Grandpa's comfort and started openly discussing their inheritance expectations. They brought up property values at inappropriate moments. They coincidentally left real estate listings and luxury car brochures around his house. I became their enemy. In their narrative, I was manipulating a dying man to secure my own inheritance. The truth that I spent every weekend and eventually took leave from work to care for him didn't fit their story. 2 months after his diagnosis, Grandpa asked me to help him contact Mr. Bennett, his attorney. I drove him to the law office and waited in the reception area for 3 hours while they met privately. When he emerged, he seemed lighter somehow. "Everything all right?" I asked as we drove home. "Getting there," he replied with a small smile. "Just making sure things go where they should." My parents' behavior worsened as Grandpa's health declined. They showed up unannounced at his house, always when I was out running errands. After one such visit, I returned to find Grandpa's home office in disarray. "They were looking for my will," he told me calmly. "They won't find it." "Should I say something to them?" I asked, reorganizing his papers. "No need. Let them show who they truly are." For months into his illness, my mother cornered me in Grandpa's kitchen. I was preparing his medications when she sauntered in, designer purse swinging from her arm. "You know, Mackenzie, your father and I have been talking. We're concerned about Harold's state of mind." I measured out his pain medication carefully. "His mind is perfectly clear." "Is it?" She examined her manicure. "Because making major financial decisions while on heavy medications could be considered problematic. Legally speaking." I set down the pill organizer and turned to face her. "Are you threatening to contest his will?" "I'm simply saying we're prepared to protect the family interests. Richard is his only child, after all." "And what about Grandpa's interests? His wishes?" She waved her hand dismissively. He's not thinking clearly. You're taking advantage of that. That night, I told Grandpa about the conversation. He wasn't surprised. I expected as much, he said, adjusting his position in the hospital bed we'd set up in his living room. Which is why I need you to do something for me. He reached for a small wooden box on his nightstand and removed a key. After the will reading, no matter what happens, go to First National Bank. Box 722. This key opens it. What's inside? Insurance, he replied. Against people who value money over family. 2 weeks later, he was gone. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, peaceful in his own home just as he wanted. My parents arrived 40 minutes after I called them. Just enough time for them to make it from their house 10 minutes away. I found them in his office shortly after, rifling through his desk drawers. The gulf between us, already wide, became unbridgeable in that moment. As August turned to September, Grandpa Harold's strength waned visibly. The hospice nurse visited daily, adjusting medications and helping with his care, but the real work fell to me. I took an extended leave from Morgan Stanley, grateful for a boss who understood family obligations. My parents visited sporadically, always with an agenda. They brought real estate agents just to get an appraisal while Grandpa was napping. They asked pointed questions about his investment portfolio when he was too tired to deflect them. Each visit left him exhausted and me seething. Don't waste energy being angry, Grandpa told me one evening as I adjusted his pillows. They are who they are. How are you not angry? I asked, perching on the edge of his bed. They're already dividing up your possessions while you're still here. He reached for my hand, his once strong fingers now fragile. Because I've made peace with my disappointments. And I've planned accordingly. Those plans involved multiple private meetings with Mr. Bennett. Sometimes they met at the house when I took brief breaks to shower and change clothes. Other times, when Grandpa felt stronger, I drove him to the law office. They always spoke behind closed doors, and I never asked questions. I respected his privacy even as curiosity gnawed at me. One night in late September, unable to sleep, I found Grandpa awake and alert, gazing out his bedroom window at the moon. Can't sleep either? I asked, bringing him fresh water. Sleep feels like a waste now, he replied. Not many nights left. I sat beside him, and for a while, we just existed together in the quiet darkness. I've been thinking about your father, he finally said. About where I went wrong with him. You didn't. He held up a hand. I did. I gave without teaching. Provided without requiring responsibility. He turned to look at me directly. But I learned from those mistakes with you. Is that why you made me work through college? Take those financial classes? He nodded. Money without wisdom destroys more families than poverty ever could. That night, he shared stories I'd never heard about his own modest upbringing, about building his construction business from nothing, about the principles that guided his success. As dawn broke, he seemed to reach a decision. Mackenzie, after I'm gone, things might get ugly. Your parents, they'll be disappointed with my choices. I can handle them, I assured him. I know you can. But I need you to promise me something. His blue eyes, though sunken, were intense. No matter what happens at the will reading, trust the process. Can you do that? Of course, I promised, though uncertainty flickered inside me. The next day, Mr. Bennett visited again. This time, they asked me to join them after their private consultation. Mackenzie, Mr. Bennett began formally, your grandfather has asked me to explain certain aspects of his estate plan to you. For the next hour, he outlined a complex arrangement of trusts, accounts, and contingencies that made my financial background useful for the first time in this ordeal. I asked clarifying questions, took notes, and gradually understood the elegance of Grandpa's plan. There's one more thing, Grandpa said when the lawyer had finished. From his nightstand drawer, he removed a small envelope and handed it to me. Inside was the key he'd shown me earlier. First National, Box 722, he reminded me. Only after the will reading. What will I find? I couldn't help asking. The truth, he replied simply. And protection from what comes after. In his final week, Grandpa declined rapidly. The hospice nurse increased his morphine, and lucid moments became rare treasures. My parents appeared more frequently, always when other visitors were present, playing their roles as the concerned son and daughter-in-law. One afternoon, I returned from a quick errand to find my mother sitting by Grandpa's bedside, holding his hand with performative tenderness. She didn't realize I could hear her from the hallway. "Remember that summer house in Cape Cod we always loved?" she was saying to his unresponsive form. "Richard and I were thinking that would make a wonderful inheritance. Something to remember you by." I cleared my throat as I entered, and she jumped slightly. "Just reminiscing," she said with a brittle smile. That night, during a brief moment of clarity, Grandpa squeezed my hand and whispered, "Stay strong, Mac. Remember what matters." Those were his last coherent words to me. He passed away peacefully 3 days later, with me by his side. My parents arrived after he was gone, my father immediately making calls about funeral arrangements while my mother examined the artwork on the walls with new interest. As I watched them, I felt the weight of the key in my pocket and wondered what truth awaited me in box 722. The funeral home my parents selected for Grandpa's service was the most expensive in the county, all mahogany and marble, with staff who spoke in reverent whispers. The basic package wasn't enough. They upgraded everything from the casket to the flower arrangements, signing my grandfather's name to the checks without hesitation. "Harold deserves the best," my mother told the funeral director, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I said nothing. Grandpa had been clear about wanting simplicity, but this battle wasn't worth fighting. Let them have their performance. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and crisp, one of those perfect October days in New England when the maples burn scarlet and gold. I dressed in a simple black dress that Grandpa had complimented once, nothing flashy or designer-labeled like my mother's ensemble. "You couldn't have made more of an effort?" she hissed when she saw me. "People will be watching." "I'm not here for people," I replied. "I'm here for Grandpa." The service was crowded. Harold Thompson had been respected in business and the community. I recognized faces from his construction company, from local charities he supported, from the neighborhood where he'd lived for 40 years. My parents worked the room like politicians, accepting condolences with practiced grace. I sat quietly in the front row until a familiar voice broke through my isolation. "Thought you could use this." Haley Norton, my best friend since 3rd grade, slid into the seat beside me and pressed a coffee into my hand. She'd flown in from Chicago as soon as I called about Grandpa's passing. "How are the vultures?" she whispered, nodding toward my parents. Circling lower by the hour, I murmured back. Haley had witnessed the Thompson family dynamics firsthand over the years. She'd been there when my parents missed my college graduation because they were in Bora Bora. She'd helped me move into my apartment when they claimed previous engagements. She understood. "Whatever happens, I've got your back," she promised. The service itself was dignified despite my parents' theatrical flourishes. My father delivered a eulogy that made Harold sound like a stranger, all business accolades and material success, nothing about his kindness or wisdom. I declined to speak publicly, keeping my real memories private where they couldn't be tainted. At the cemetery, as the casket was lowered, my mother clutched my father's arm and swayed dramatically. A photographer from the local paper captured the moment, exactly as she'd intended. I stood apart, my grief authentic and unperformed. The reception afterwards was held at Grandpa's house, catered with expensive food he would have hated. As guests mingled, my cousin Brooke found me hiding in the kitchen. "Quite a show they're putting on," she observed, helping herself to a deviled egg. Brooke was my father's niece, the daughter of his estranged sister who lived in Oregon. She'd flown in for the funeral despite the family rift. "They excel at appearances," I agreed. "When's the will reading?" she asked directly. "Tomorrow at 2. Mr. Bennett's office." She nodded. I'll be there. Uncle Harold called me last month, asked me to come. This surprised me. He did. Said something about witnesses being important. She squeezed my shoulder. Just so you know, not everyone in this family is like your parents. After the last guests departed, I began cleaning up while my parents lounged in the living room, already discussing what furniture they would take. Mackenzie, my father called, swirling scotch in one of Grandpa's crystal tumblers. We need to talk about tomorrow. I entered warily. What about it? We've been thinking, my mother began, her voice honeyed with false concern. You've been under so much stress caring for your grandfather. Perhaps it would be better if you skipped the will reading. We can handle the details and fill you in later. The audacity was breathtaking. I'll be there, I said firmly. My father set down his glass. Be reasonable, Mackenzie. These legal proceedings can be uncomfortable, especially when expectations aren't aligned with reality. What does that mean? It means, my mother interjected, that Harold wasn't always in his right mind toward the end. The medications, the pain, people make impulsive decisions. Are you suggesting Grandpa wasn't competent to make his own will? My father's expression hardened. We're suggesting that undue influence from someone spending excessive time with him might have colored his decisions. The accusation hung in the air between us. I felt a surge of anger but remembered Grandpa's words. Trust the process. I'll see you at the reading, I said, turning to leave. Mackenzie, my mother called after me. Family should stand together. Don't make this adversarial. I paused at the doorway. That's rich coming from you too right now. That night, I stayed at Haley's hotel instead of at Grandpa's house. I couldn't bear another minute under the same roof as my parents. As we shared a bottle of wine, I confided my anxiety about the next day. What if they contest the will? I worried. They've been hinting at it. Then they contest it, Haley said practically. Your grandfather worked with his attorney for months. I'm guessing he anticipated their moves. I fingered the key in my pocket. He gave me this. Said to go to a safety deposit box after the reading. Then that's what you'll do. She refilled my glass. Harold Thompson was nobody's fool, Mac. He knew exactly who his son and daughter-in-law were. I barely slept that night. Memories of Grandpa mingling with anxiety about the confrontation to come. By morning, I felt hollowed out but resolute. Whatever happened at the reading, I would face it with the dignity Grandpa had taught me. Mr. Bennett called as I was getting dressed. Mackenzie, he said, his voice formal as always. Before today's proceedings, I wanted to check if you had any questions. Just one, I replied. Did Grandpa know what he was doing? With the will, I mean. There was a pause, then his voice softened slightly. Your grandfather was one of the most clear-headed clients I've ever had. Trust his judgment. Even at the end? Especially at the end. Another pause. Remember what he told you. Follow his instructions. As I hung up, a text came through from my mother, wearing the navy Chanel today. You might want to dress appropriately for once. I put on my simple black dress again, added Grandpa's mother's pearl necklace he'd given me for college graduation, and headed to face whatever came next. Bennett, Cromwell and Associates occupied the top floor of a brick building in downtown Boston, their offices a testament to old money and discretion. The reception area featured leather chairs, oil paintings of stern-faced founding partners, and a hushed atmosphere that made even whispers seem intrusive. I arrived 15 minutes early, but my parents had beaten me there. My mother wore her navy Chanel suit as promised, complemented by diamond earrings I'd never seen before. My father looked uncomfortable in his tailored suit, pulling at his collar repeatedly. Mackenzie, my mother acknowledged with a tight smile. I see you chose to wear the same dress again. I touched Grandpa's mother's pearls. Some things have meaning beyond their price tag. Mr. Bennett's assistant, a composed woman in her 50s, appeared before my mother could respond. Mr. Bennett is ready for you now. Please follow me. The conference room featured a massive oak table that could seat 20, though only 8 chairs had been arranged today. My parents immediately took seats at the head of the table, forcing me to sit along the side. Cousin Brooke arrived moments later, nodding to me as she took the seat beside mine. Two elderly men I recognized as Grandpa's business partners entered next, followed by Martha, Grandpa's housekeeper of 30 years. My mother frowned at Martha's presence. I wasn't aware staff would be attending, she whispered loudly to my father. Mr. Bennett entered last, carrying a leather portfolio and several file folders. At 70, he was rail-thin with a shock of white hair and piercing gray eyes that missed nothing. He'd been Grandpa's attorney and friend for over 40 years. "Thank you all for coming," he began formally. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Harold James Thompson, dated September 12th of this year." My mother shifted in her seat. "That's quite recent," she observed with forced casualness. "Indeed," Mr. Bennett replied without elaboration. He opened his portfolio and withdrew a document. "Before I begin the formal reading, Mr. Thompson left a letter to be shared with all present." He adjusted his reading glasses and began. "To those I leave behind, if you're hearing this, I've finally run out of time. Don't waste yours on excessive grief. Life continues, and so should you. I've tried to live by certain principles: honesty in business, generosity to those in need, and investing in people rather than just possessions. My successes and failures will be measured by how well I upheld these values, not by the wealth I accumulated. In distributing my estate, I've considered not just family ties, but the character and actions of each beneficiary. Some may be disappointed, others surprised. My decisions weren't made lightly or in haste, but with clear mind and purpose. To those who receive less than expected, consider what you've already taken. To those receiving more, remember that privilege carries responsibility. Wealth can build or destroy. Choose wisely. With affection and hope, Harold Thompson." My father's face had darkened progressively during the reading. My mother's smile had frozen in place. I studied my hands, feeling Grandpa's presence in every carefully chosen word. Mr. Bennett set aside the letter and began the formal proceedings. The initial bequests were modest and unsurprising, $50,000 each to Grandpa's business partners, his beloved Ford truck to his construction company foreman, a generous retirement package to Martha, who dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Then came the larger assets. To my niece, Brooke Thompson Davis, I leave my lakeside cabin in New Hampshire and the sum of $500,000. Brooke inhaled sharply beside me. The cabin had been her favorite place to visit as a child, before family rifts had separated us. To my son, Richard Thompson, and his wife, Diane Thompson, Mr. Bennett continued, his voice neutral, I leave the sum of $100,000 and my collection of rare books. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's face flushed crimson, while my mother's complexion went chalk white. "That's impossible," my father sputtered. "There must be some mistake." Mr. Bennett continued as if he hadn't heard. "The remainder of my estate, including my primary residence, investment portfolios, business holdings, and all other assets not specifically designated, valued at approximately $9 million, I leave to my granddaughter, Mackenzie Grace Thompson." The silence that followed was absolute. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process what I'd just heard. $9 million. Grandpa had left me everything. Mr. Bennett removed a check from his folder and slid it across the table to me. "This represents an initial distribution from the estate. The remainder will be transferred once probate is complete." I stared at the check made out in my name. $9 million. My hands trembled as I reached for it. "This is outrageous." My mother's voice shattered the silence, her composure finally breaking. Harold wasn't in his right mind. Mackenzie manipulated him when he was vulnerable. "I assure you, Mrs. Thompson, your father-in-law was of sound mind when he signed this will," Mr. Bennett replied evenly. "It was witnessed by myself, my partner, and a geriatric psychiatrist who certified his competence. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. We'll contest this. You'll be hearing from our attorneys. Mr. Bennett seemed unperturbed. That is your right, of course. I still hadn't spoken, my eyes fixed on the check in my hands. This wasn't what I had expected or wanted. I'd never cared about Grandpa's money. Suddenly, my mother lunged across the table, snatching the check from my fingers with such force that I felt a paper cut slice my index finger. You think you've won, she hissed, her face contorted with rage. You think you've turned him against his own son. My father pulled a silver lighter from his pocket, the one Grandpa had given him for his 30th birthday. With deliberate slowness, he flicked it open. This is what you get for cutting us off, he snarled, holding the flame to the corner of the check. The paper caught quickly, curling and blackening as the flames consumed it. My mother dropped it into a metal trash can beside the table where it continued to burn. Everyone in the room watched in shocked silence. Mr. Bennett half rose from his chair, then slowly sat back down, his expression unreadable. I should have been devastated. I should have tried to save the check. Instead, a strange calm washed over me as I watched $9 million turn to ash. The corner of my mouth lifted in a small, knowing smile. My parents' triumph faltered at my reaction. Why are you smiling? My mother demanded, suddenly uncertain. I said nothing, simply meeting her gaze steadily. Mr. Bennett cleared his throat. If we're quite finished with the theatrics, he said dryly, there are additional matters to discuss. In private. He gestured to Grandpa's business partners and Martha. Thank you for coming. The formal proceedings are concluded. As they filed out, Brooke squeezed my shoulder. You okay? I nodded. Better than okay. Richard, Diane, Mackenzie, Mr. Bennett said when the door closed, please remain seated. There are contingency provisions in Harold's will that have now been activated. My father frowned. What contingency provisions? Mr. Bennett opened another folder. Before I explain, I should inform you that today's proceedings were recorded on video, as stipulated by Mr. Thompson. He gestured to a small camera discreetly mounted in the corner of the room. My parents' faces drained of color simultaneously. Now, the attorney continued, shall we discuss what happens next? The conference room felt smaller somehow as Mr. Bennett pressed a button on the intercom. Sandra, please bring in the contingency files. My parents exchanged nervous glances. The confident fury that had propelled them to burn the check was evaporating rapidly. What game is this? My father demanded, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. Mr. Bennett folded his hands on the table. No game, Mr. Thompson. Simply the execution of your father's carefully considered estate plan. His assistant entered with another leather portfolio, this one thicker than the first. She placed it before Mr. Bennett and exited silently. Mackenzie, Mr. Bennett said, do you have the key your grandfather gave you? I reached into my purse and removed the small brass key that had been my constant companion since Grandpa's final days. My parents stared at it with dawning comprehension. What key? What is this? My mother asked, her voice rising. Mr. Bennett ignored her. After our meeting, you'll need to visit First National Bank. The contents of box 722 will be important. I nodded, clutching the key tightly. Now, he continued, opening the portfolio, let me explain what just happened here. The check that was burned was indeed valid. However, it represented only a symbolic portion of Miss Thompson's inheritance. Symbolic? My father repeated. Yes. The bulk of Harold's estate was transferred into irrevocable trusts 3 months ago, with Mackenzie named as beneficiary. The check was, shall we say, a test. The blood drained from my mother's face. A test? Indeed. Mr. Bennett removed a document and slid it across the table. This amendment to Harold's will, executed the same day as the will itself, stipulates that if either of you interfered with Mackenzie's inheritance in any way, including destroying financial instruments, threatening legal action, or demonstrating hostility and avarice at the reading, certain consequences would follow. My father snatched up the document, scanning it frantically. This can't be legal. I assure you it is. The provision has been thoroughly vetted by our firm's estate specialists. Mr. Bennett turned to me. Mackenzie, your inheritance remains intact. The $9 million is secured in trusts that cannot be touched by anyone but you. Relief washed through me, not for the money, but for the knowledge that Grandpa's wishes would be honored. As for you, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, the attorney continued, the contingency provision reduces your inheritance to $10,000 each. The remaining $80,000 and the rare book collection will be donated to the Boston Public Library in Harold's name. He can't do that, my mother shrieked, her composure completely gone. Where is family? Family was very important to Harold, Mr. Bennett agreed mildly. Which is why he documented your treatment of him and Mackenzie so meticulously. He removed a thick folder from the portfolio. This contains 20 years of financial records. Loans never repaid. Credit cards opened in his name without permission. Mortgages he covered to prevent foreclosure. In total, the amount exceeds $800,000. My parents sat in stunned silence. There's more, Mr. Bennett continued. Box 722, which Mackenzie will access shortly, contains recorded conversations, emails, and text messages documenting your plans to contest the will regardless of its contents, your discussions about Harold's mental competence, or lack thereof, and your efforts to pressure Mackenzie into surrendering her inheritance. I stared at the attorney in shock. Grandpa recorded them? With their knowledge, technically. That disclaimer on Harold's home phone about calls being recorded for quality purposes wasn't just boilerplate. And Massachusetts is a two-party consent state, so he was careful to only preserve communications where such consent was established. My father's face had gone from red to gray. Why would he do this? Because he knew you, I said softly, finding my voice at last. He knew exactly what would happen today. Mr. Bennett nodded. Harold hoped he was wrong. The check was indeed a test. Had you accepted the will's terms graciously, a secondary provision would have awarded you an additional $1 million over time. My mother made a choke sound. Instead, the attorney continued, you chose to destroy financial instruments, threaten legal action, and accuse Mackenzie of manipulation, all captured on video and all triggering the contingency provisions. He closed the portfolio with finality. Should you choose to contest the will now, these materials will be submitted to the court. Given Massachusetts estate law, I cannot recommend pursuing that course of action. My father slumped in his chair. He planned all of this. Set us up to fail. No, I corrected quietly. He gave you one last chance to do the right thing. You chose differently. My mother turned to me, desperation replacing rage. Mackenzie, darling, surely you can see this isn't fair. We're your parents. We raised you. Grandpa raised me, I replied. He taught me about integrity, responsibility, and consequences. Lessons you never learned. So that's it? My father demanded. You take everything and leave your own parents with nothing? Mr. Bennett interjected before I could respond. Miss Thompson is under no obligation to share her inheritance. However, nothing prevents her from making gifts should she choose to do so. All eyes turned to me expectantly. In that moment, I felt the weight of Grandpa's trust, his confidence in my judgment. I need time, I said finally. This isn't a decision I can make today. My parents' faces fell in identical expressions of calculation and disappointment. They had already mentally spent money that wasn't theirs. Of course, Mr. Bennett agreed. Take all the time you need. He began gathering his papers. Unless there are further questions, our business here is concluded. My father stood abruptly. This isn't over, he warned, though his threat sounded hollow even to my ears. Actually, Richard, it is, the attorney replied. Harold made certain of that. My parents stormed out without another word, leaving me alone with Mr. Bennett. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He knew them so well, I finally said, tears filling my eyes for the first time that day. Every move, every reaction. He predicted all of it. Mr. Bennet's formal demeanor softened slightly. Your grandfather was a shrewd judge of character. It served him well in business and, unfortunately, with family too. He hesitated, then added he was incredibly proud of you, Mackenzie. Said you were the best thing his son ever did, even if Richard couldn't see it. I wiped away a tear. Thank you for telling me that. The bank closes at 5, he reminded me gently. Box 722. I nodded, gathering my belongings. As I reached the door, a question occurred to me. Mr. Bennet, if they hadn't burned the check, if they'd accepted everything without a fight, would Grandpa really have given them the extra $1 million? The attorney's lips curved in a small smile. Harold believed in second chances, but he also believed in preparation. Why don't you ask him yourself? Ask him. Box 722, he repeated. Some questions are better answered directly from the source. 6 months passed like water through my fingers. Spring arrived in Boston, cherry blossoms dotting the public garden where I sat on a bench, watching children chase bubbles across the grass. So much had changed since that October day in Mr. Bennet's office. After the will reading, I'd gone directly to First National Bank. The manager escorted me to the vault personally. Apparently, Grandpa had been a valued customer for decades. Box 722 was larger than I'd expected, requiring 2 keys to open, mine and the bank's. Inside, I found several items carefully arranged. A leather-bound journal with Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. USB drives labeled by date. A folder of legal documents. And most surprisingly, a sealed envelope with "Watch this first," Mac written in Grandpa's hand. The envelope contained a flash drive. The bank manager provided a private room with a computer where I could view its contents. With trembling fingers, I inserted the drive and opened the single video file it contained. Grandpa's face filled the screen, recorded perhaps 2 months before his death. He looked tired but lucid, his blue eyes still sharp. "Hello, Mac," he began, and tears sprang to my eyes at the sound of his voice. "If you're watching this, then several things have happened. I'm gone, the will has been read, and your parents reacted exactly as I predicted." He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly with pain. "I'm sorry to put you through that spectacle, but it was necessary. Your parents needed to reveal their true characters, not just to you, but to themselves." For nearly 30 minutes, Grandpa explained everything. How he'd documented my parents' financial exploitation for years. How he'd structured his estate to protect it from their challenges. How he'd created the test of the check, hoping against hope that they might surprise him with grace, but preparing for their likely reaction. "The money is yours, Mackenzie," he said toward the end. "You've demonstrated the character to handle it wisely. But wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. Use it to build something meaningful. Help others where you can. And remember that the most valuable things I'm leaving you aren't measured in dollars." He leaned closer to the camera. "As for your parents, that decision is yours. They've shown you who they are repeatedly. Believe them. But also remember that people can change when they hit rock bottom. Just don't mistake wishful thinking for evidence." His final words stayed with me long after the video ended. "I'm proud of the woman you've become, Mac. That's my true legacy. Everything else is just details." The other contents of the safety deposit box provided context and protection. Grandpa had meticulously documented every loan to my parents, every financial bailout, every manipulation. The journal contained his private thoughts as he watched their behavior worsen over the years. The legal documents established ironclad trusts that would withstand any challenge. In the months that followed, I made several significant decisions. First, I resigned from Morgan Stanley to focus on establishing the Harold Thompson Foundation for Financial Literacy, using $3 million of my inheritance. The foundation would provide education and resources to help low-income families build financial stability. Second, I purchased a modest 3-bedroom house in Cambridge, comfortable but not extravagant. Grandpa would have approved. Third, I maintained my distance from my parents. They had called daily at first, messages oscillating between threats and tearful pleas. When those tactics failed, they sent their attorney with a settlement proposal for $1 million in exchange for not contesting the will. Mr. Bennett had smiled thinly when I showed him the offer. "They still don't understand what they're up against, do they?" he'd observed. I declined through formal channels. The calls eventually stopped. Today, as I sat in the public garden, I was meeting someone who had unexpectedly become important in my life. Ethan Davis, a financial advisor I'd consulted about the foundation, had asked me to coffee 6 weeks ago. Coffee became dinner, then weekend hikes, then something I wasn't quite ready to label, but that felt promising. What made Ethan different was that he'd asked me out before learning about my inheritance. To him, I was just Mackenzie Thompson, slightly workaholic finance professional with a passion for financial education. When he eventually discovered the truth, his main concern had been whether it would change things between us. It hadn't. "Penny for your thoughts?" Ethan's voice broke through my reverie as he approached, carrying 2 coffee cups. "Thinking about Grandpa," I admitted, accepting the drink. Today would have been his birthday. He sat beside me. "Want to talk about it?" I did. Ethan listened as I shared memories of fishing trips and life lessons, of the wisdom that had shaped me. He understood why I'd structured the foundation as I had, why I lived more modestly than my resources allowed. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" I said as we walked through the park later. "Not the money, but the clarity. Grandpa gave me the gift of seeing people as they truly are." "Including your parents?" Ethan asked carefully. I nodded. "Especially them." I hadn't told him yet about my most recent decision. Last week, I'd established a third trust, a much smaller one, that would provide my parents with a modest monthly income starting next year. Not the millions they'd expected, but enough to live comfortably if they managed it wisely. There were conditions: financial counseling, regular check-ins with trustees, restrictions on extravagant purchases. They might reject it out of pride. They might accept it with resentment. Either way, I'd done what felt right while protecting myself from further manipulation. "Your grandfather would be proud," Ethan said, squeezing my hand. "Not just of the foundation, but of how you've handled everything." Later that evening, after Ethan left for a business dinner, I visited Martha in the assisted living facility, where she now lived comfortably thanks to Grandpa's generosity. At 82, she remained sharp as ever, her memories of Harold providing me with stories I'd never heard. "He knew, she told me as we shared tea in her sunny apartment. Knew exactly what they'd do with that check." "Did he tell you about that?" I asked, surprised. She chuckled. "Harold and I talked every day for 30 years. Not much he didn't share eventually." She patted my hand. "He worried about putting you in that position, but he said you had a strength your father never developed." "I wish he could see what I'm doing with the foundation," I said wistfully. "Oh, he knew what you'd do," Martha assured me. "Said you'd find a way to help others with that money. That's why he left it to you instead of my parents, who would have spent it on themselves." The truth of that hung between us, acknowledged but not requiring further comment. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The inheritance had changed my life, but not in the ways most people might expect. It hadn't altered my values or my goals, it had simply provided resources to pursue them more effectively. The real inheritance from Grandpa wasn't the $9 million. It was the wisdom to use it well, the strength to stand firm against manipulation, and the clarity to recognize authentic relationships. My parents had burned a check thinking they were punishing me. Instead, they had revealed themselves one final time, not just to me, but to themselves. That revelation had been Grandpa's true gift, more valuable than any amount of money. Tomorrow, the Harold Thompson Foundation would announce its first round of grants to community organizations teaching financial literacy. Next month, I would begin volunteering as a financial counselor at a women's shelter. And next year, perhaps, I would see if my parents were ready to rebuild our relationship on more honest terms. Life continued, just as Grandpa had written in his letter. And so did his lessons, living on through choices made with integrity and purpose. What have you learned about family, money, and integrity in your life? Has someone's true character ever been revealed to you in a moment of crisis? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to follow more stories of resilience and growth, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing your ground can lead to new beginnings. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May we all find the strength to honor our values when they're tested.